Welcome. This is, I think, the official first large format open to the public Scott Institute event we've had in some time. It is so gratifying to see all you folks in this room, and there's just such a great collection of fantastic new arrivals to the community and people who have been just foundational to CMU Energy for decades. And it's just such a fantastic moment, which I didn't expect to have almost an emotional response to, but it's really gratifying. I'm Jay Whitaker. I'm the director of the Scott Institute for Energy Innovation. And before I go any further, I just want to thank the staff of the Scott Institute who are all here in various places. And I also like to introduce really briefly Daniel Tachik. I always see this, but I can't ever, it's phonetic and I'm bad with words, who's the new executive director here, and it's a real pleasure, and all of these folks you'll see and interact with throughout the rest of the evening. We always start off talking briefly about what the Scott Institute is. For those folks who have not been to any of our events, please go to our website and check it out. And the key thing we're trying to do here is to focus in and really use our faculty and staff here at CMU to address the most pressing energy-related issues on the planet and also locally, and do whatever we can to leverage these things. We want to find the most impactful work we can. We want to focus on not just technology, but also social equity, policy, economics, things like that. It's fantastic, for example, that we're doing this in the Tepper School of Business Building today. And the last thing I want to mention about Scott Institute is that we're actually celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year. It was almost exactly 10 years ago. It was 10 years ago this month that the Institute was founded by a joint gift between the Scott family and the R.K. Mellon Foundation, and we've been growing ever since. We've had, I'm the third director in a line of what will be hopefully many more of us, and the fantastic sort of progress that we've had over 10 years is great. If you also will have a chance to download our 10-year our past year and a half impact report, which also captures the past 10 years in a couple snapshots. And so I really encourage you to go and engage us on our website and just reach out in general. And the last key thing, CMU is co-hosting, or at least shadow co-hosting, the Global Clean Energy Action Forum, which is, of course, happening starting tomorrow evening and running through Friday. There'll be many, I think 6,000 or 7,000 people from around the world descending on downtown Pittsburgh. And we were sort of chosen last year to be the venue for this. We have 30 or so energy ministers from major countries around the world coming here to have a conversation. And the DOE and the government of the United States really was happy and eager to highlight Pittsburgh as the city to do this in. So it's a real honor that we're hosting this. And it's also extra special because CMU has been instrumental in the entire thing. So if you haven't signed up, it's probably too late to register actually, although I have no idea what happens if you just show up. This is like an open. But if you have registered, please go and participate. We have many faculty who are doing side events and are otherwise involved. There's about a dozen Scott Institute faculty affiliates that are hosting or participating in side events, including Valerie, who will also be part of the conversation tonight. And everything from clean energy transition, workforce impacts, grid resilience, et cetera. And we also have faculty and students presenting energy tech demos at the Energy Technology Showcase, which is one of the many signed things that are happening down there at the venue. We're also co-hosting a tour of energy demos at Mill 19, which is over in Hazelwood. And there's a moment where that's open to the public as well. So please, again, go to the website, check out the various things that we have going on, and participate. Now that we're sort of back and forth as a community, it's great to get out and do these things physically. It's lovely. So, but today really is about our very distinguished lecturer, Sally Benson. And she's in town for the Global Clean Energy Action Forum, and we're so lucky that she was willing to come and give this talk. Here's what's going to happen this afternoon. So I'm going to ask friend and colleague Ed Rubin to come up and introduce Sally. And then following her remarks, which will be 10 or 15 minutes long, Valerie and I are going to sit up here. We're going to have like a fireside chat, and we're going to hope you guys are interested in engaging with questions. We have some starter questions, but we'd like you all to think about questions as you hear her talk, and us first engage what else you would maybe want to contribute or ask. We'll have a QR code that's available when this happens where you can show your phone and then immediately enter questions, and will come to us, and we'll then put them up to the panel. So without further ado, I'm going to present Ed Rubin, who's going to move us forward.
Thank you, Jay. Before I introduce Sally, let me start by first thanking Jay and Daniel and the leadership of the Scott Institute for their very critical role in planning the Global Clean Energy Action Forum that's taking place downtown this week. That forum, as Jay indicated, will also shine a light on some of the amazing work going on here at Carnegie Mellon. And much of that is thanks to support from the Scott Institute. So thanks, guys. I'm also especially happy that the Institute is hosting today's very special event, which has brought to the campus Dr. Sally Benson from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where she is, let me make sure I get the title right, Deputy Director for Energy and Chief Strategist for the Energy Transition. For those of you not familiar with Washington offices, this is a very big deal. Sally is on leave at OSTP from Stanford University, where she is the Precourt Family Professor in the Department of Energy Resources Engineering. And prior to joining Stanford in 2007, she held senior management positions at the Department of Energy's Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. I first met Sally, it's actually coming up on 20 years ago, when we served together on a special report for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. At that time, Sally was, and today she still remains, the world's best known and most widely respected scientist working on the geological sequestration of carbon dioxide. After joining Stanford, she began to take on an increasingly broader set of activities and leadership roles in climate change mitigation and clean energy systems. She first served as the director of the Global Climate and Energy Project, which, when it was launched years ago, was launched as a very, very well-funded 10-year initiative that, frankly, was the envy of all university-based research programs at that time. And is still the act to beat in many cases. Later, she became the director and co-director of another pioneering initiative at Stanford, the Precourt Institute for Energy. So with that introduction, let me just conclude by saying I've known Sally for a long time, and on a personal note, I can tell you that you will never meet a warmer and more gracious person, nor a more accomplished and knowledgeable speaker than Sally Benson. No pressure, Sally. So we are honored and proud to have her here with us today, and Sally, the podium is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Jay and Ed. Yeah, Ed and I have many stories of traveling around the world together as part of the IPCC Special Report on Carbon Dioxide Capture and Storage. I'm not sure he was part of the Caipirinha party in Brazil, but anyway, probably better off for that. Anyway, it's great to be here. And I'm looking forward to a conversation. So I'm going to make some remarks. Hopefully they'll be brief, but then we'll move into what I hope is really a great conversation with all of you here in the audience. I will say it's really wonderful to be back here at a university. And I notice most of the students are sitting in the back of the classroom. So anyway, but it's really great here. You know, universities are filled with so many creative people and always thinking about the future and developing new ideas and inventing new technologies, and these are just very special environments which are really the crucible in which the future of the planet is decided. So anyway, but it's also my particular pleasure to be here because two of my colleagues on our fantastic energy team come from Carnegie Mellon University. So Kostas Samaras, there he is. So I thought he wasn't going to be here. Anyway. Just an amazing team member. And if any of you have been paying attention to what the people have been saying about cryptocurrency and the environmental impacts of cryptocurrency and climate impacts, well, Costa wrangled together a team of, I don't know, 20 or 30 authors and negotiated a really complex discussion about how we should think about the future of those and how to mitigate the environmental impacts of those technologies. So got a lot of press, and I think he got it just right. And anyway, got a lot of positive feedback around. So congratulations, Costa. And then also Rachel Rialfi. She's a policy assistant here. Yeah. And when Rachel showed up, it was in January, I think, and I said, we're going to put on the first ever White House Fusion Summit, and you're going to do it. And I have no clue how to do it here. And Rachel just said, okay, let's go. So anyway, and she did it and pulled it off, and it was really now sort of the blueprint of how to have an awesome science-related summit in the White House. So thanks for that. She's also doing really important work, working on net zero game changers, trying to work across all the agencies to develop a common innovation strategy for helping us meet our climate goals. So thanks, Carnegie Mellon, for nurturing these great people, and they're really working so hard and giving so much for their country. So thank you to both of them. Okay, so I want to start off by just telling you, especially the students here, is that I get it, okay? I get it that all of your life you've lived under the cloud of climate change. And I know you've lived in an environment where scientists have been warning that unless we rapidly and deeply reduce emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, that the climate would change and it would cause harm to ecosystems and the engineered infrastructure that we rely on to sustain our lives. And I understand that you're worried about your future. And you're worried that you're going to bear the burden of trying to fix a problem that, had we acted sooner, we could have prevented it. And here we sit today looking at the devastation in Alaska, in Pakistan, in Puerto Rico, all of these climate-induced crises which real people are suffering. So, and I know you're frustrated by the lack of action, and I can tell you so am I. But that's not what I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about is why I'm hopeful now and why I think that we've turned the corner on climate change, because today we've built the foundations for equitably tackling the climate challenge and building climate resilience into our future. So why do I think this? Well, number one, the technology to address this problem, or at least much of it, is available and affordably, at least to go a long way towards reducing emissions. And if we went back 10 years ago, before you were here, and this was the same conversation, I couldn't have said that. You know, solar PV was expensive, wind was not so expensive, but batteries and electric vehicles, I mean, there were almost no options. So there's really been a sea change in terms of the availability of technology. So that's number one. Number two, I think something incredibly important that is underpinning much of how we think about the energy transition today is that we realize that our energy system is not fair. Okay, we've established that. And this is really due to the hard work of academics and advocates who really made the case that the benefits of the energy services that we have are not equitably distributed. And sadly, tens of billions or billions of people, including tens of millions in the United States alone, can't get enough energy to keep their houses warm or keep their houses cool, and they're struggling to pay their energy bills. And we also know that people of color are disproportionately exposed to pollution from transportation corridors and industrial activities. And now we don't just know about it, we're doing something about it. So in particular, to address these historic inequities, the administration's Justice 40 program has created a goal that 40% of the overall benefits of the federal investments in solving the climate problem will flow to disadvantaged communities that today are marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution. And I can tell you, sitting in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, we see lots of programs flow through our offices, and almost always how the Justice 40 element will be included in those programs is spelled out very clearly. And the third reason I think we've turned the corner is that we've just passed historic legislation through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And together, these provide nearly $500 billion, $440 billion to supercharge the energy transition. So taken together, all of these things are expected to reduce emissions by about 40% by 2030 and put us well on the pathway to net zero emissions by 2050 or sooner. And we're not going to just reduce emissions. We're going to create good jobs. We're going to address historical inequities, and we're going to strengthen our economic and national security in the course of doing this. So because of all these things, I'm more hopeful than I have ever been before that I believe that today the foundations for tackling the climate problem are in place. So that's not to say you can all change your majors, that there's not work to do. In fact, there's a ton of work to do. And the hard work is going to be to implement all of these measures, and we've just begun to do that. So I want to delve into these topics a little bit greater. So let's talk about technology to start with. So through the collective work of countless innovators and inventors, including many who've been at universities, we have the building blocks for a clean energy future. And this future is in reach, where imagine that most of our electricity comes from carbon-free sources: solar, wind, batteries, nuclear power, natural gas or biomass with carbon capture and storage, clean hydrogen, and more. And we live at a time when we can imagine a flexible, secure electric grid that uses all the resources, supply, demand, and energy storage to maximize comfort, affordably, reliably, and safety. And it's easy to imagine now that battery electric vehicles or fuel cell electric vehicles are the car of choice, and that heat pumps are going to provide clean and efficient heating and cooling. And clean hydrogen is available for fueling industry and shipping. And advanced biofuels and electrofuels will power aviation. And we're going to create entirely new industries that are growing and creating good new jobs. And we're also thinking about things like supply chains, making sure that we have all the materials that we need and that these supply chains are more secure than ever. And that the air and the water is getting cleaner everywhere for everyone, but especially for people of color and low-income communities who've borne the burden of historic pollution loads. So with this portfolio of technologies, which again is we can do all of these things today, we can go very, very far down the path towards net zero. We won't get to net zero, we have more to do, but we can go very, very far. So our amazing Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, says deploy, deploy, deploy. And that's the implementation we have to do. So this doesn't say that we don't need more new technology. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't work to continue to improve the technology we have. We need to do this. Some sectors of the economy, though, particularly industry and agriculture, need more innovation. But it's not just that. All clean energy technologies, we need to get them less expensive. We need them to be more efficient. We need to be less resource intensive. And we want to rely on earth-abundant materials and minerals. And we want clean energy to be the cheapest energy and the most reliable energy. So it's the easy choice, not just in the United States, but all around the world. We're at the beginning of a century-scale transformation, a tectonic shift away from an old energy system built around combusting fossil fuel and biomass to a clean energy system built on sustainable energy resources and conversion technologies. So now I want to switch over to the legislation that you've been probably reading about in blogs and newspapers or wherever you get your information. And these are huge pieces of legislation, and there are many, many important pieces. There's just level of detail. But I want to highlight some of the things that I think are most transformative and are going to get us on this pathway to this 40% emission reduction by 2030. So just to review, there are two key pieces of legislation. One is called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and colloquially we call it Bill. So we'll call that Bill, okay? And then we have the Inflation Reduction Act called IRA. Yeah, so from now on, I'm going to just say IRA and Bill, because that's easier to say than all those other words that just get all twisted together. Okay, so together, as I said, these provide massive investment in technology and infrastructure, about $500 billion to transform the energy system. So these investments, though, are also intended to catalyze much more investment by the private sector, and they target change throughout the entire energy system, from production of raw materials to making better end-use equipment. And these are sweeping. They include tax credits for renewable and low-emission energy, loan guarantees for building new clean energy industries, direct financial support for cost-shared technology demonstration projects and industrial decarbonization. And they also target partnerships with state and local programs to accelerate the build-out of the infrastructure we need to support all this new energy technology. And one piece of legislation that's also important is the CHIPS and Science Act, which passed this summer, which reinvests in R&D and supply chains that will help power the clean energy transition, including over $100 million over 4 years to enable energy entrepreneurs to partner with the Department of Energy laboratories, research facilities, and experts. This will help launch even more new clean energy startups and innovation. So for the first time, we have comprehensive legislation that will accelerate emissions reductions across every sector of the economy. Just repeat that, for the first time. You know, we've been working, around the edges of this problem. We've had renewable portfolio standards, but this legislation touches every piece of our energy system, from transportation, electricity, industry, agriculture, as well as the residential and commercial sectors. So I want to give you some specific examples of why I'm so excited, but let's talk about electricity first. So eliminating emissions from the electricity system is, I think, the single most important thing we can do for two reasons. One is we get rid of all the emissions from burning coal and fossil fuel and natural gas. But second, and equally importantly, once we have clean electricity, we can electrify light-duty transportation, home heating, and some industrial practices. So if you take these things together, that is the recipe for 50 to 60% reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. So the bill and IRA support decarbonization of the electricity and electrification in many important ways. So first, IRA will accelerate deployment of clean energy by extending the existing investment and production tax credits for renewables. And then that will transition to a technology-neutral credit that can be done for all low-carbon forms of electricity production. So what will the impact be? By 2030, we expect a 5-fold increase in the number of solar panels, huge increase, 20-fold increase in the number of wind turbines, and we're going to build 2,300 new grid-scale battery storage facilities. But it doesn't stop there. The bill recognizes that nuclear power produces about half of the clean energy that we have in this country today, and many of those facilities are struggling financially. It provides $6 billion to help those plants that are struggling economically to keep running through 2030 so we can keep that clean power. And there are also new tax incentives for producing electricity from nuclear plants. So that's part of it. That's the technology that generates the electricity. But the grid is really important, right? So the Department of Energy, through Bill, created a new Office of Grid Planning that will help plan and coordinate the huge expansion of our electricity transmission system, which is estimated to be a 60% expansion by 2023. that's going to be needed to connect all this new renewable energy and clean energy to the grid. And the bill makes the largest investment ever in climate resilience, including $11 billion in grants for states, tribes, and utilities to enhance the resilience of electric infrastructure against disruptive events. But there are also some technologies that aren't quite ready for scale-up. So for example, advanced nuclear power using a new generation of smaller and modular reactors with fail-safe designs are being developed. And the bill provides $2.5 billion for demonstration projects that will, in the mid-1920s, demonstrate those technologies. And if these are successful, then modular and factory-built reactors will be ready to quickly scale up in the early 2030s, helping us get to our target of a zero-emission electricity system by 2035. The bill also supports carbon capture demonstration projects for the electricity sector, which is very important because, again, the renewables are terrific, but we've also come to learn that we need sources of clean, firm power to augment those. So together, depending upon which analysis you believe, that the emissions from the electricity sector are expected to drop between 50 and 75% over the next 8 years. So let's move on to talking about electrification. Okay, these are incredibly important. 30% of our emissions reductions are expected to come from electrification of things that today we use fossil fuels for directly. So what did Bill and Ira do? Up to $7,500 in tax credits for new electric vehicles, and for the first time, a tax credit for used electric vehicles of $4,000. And if you have a home and you want to upgrade your heating system to include a heat pump and you want to have your EV, you can get up to $14,000 for direct consumer rebates to families to buy heat pumps or other energy-efficient home appliances. And $5 billion for clean school buses, of which half of which need to be electric. And $7.5 billion for an array of 500,000 EV chargers to make a network across the country. And $40 billion in tax credits for battery manufacturers, material suppliers, as well as funds to help auto manufacturers retool their plants. So the administration's clear direction has also jump-started private investment, which of course is by design. Since President Biden took office last year, companies have stepped up and committed more than $85 billion to build factories to manufacture electric vehicles, batteries, and battery chargers here in the US. So taken together, we expect by 2030, 10 to 15% emission reduction in the transportation sector. But it doesn't stop there. So hydrogen is expected to become a staple of a new clean energy system. And it can be made cleanly in many ways, which is a big strength. And also a big benefit of hydrogen is it can be used many ways. So it can be used in transportation, it can be used for long-term energy storage, it can be used for industrial processing, and more. So the bill and IRA support development of clean hydrogen through, again, a combination of tax credits, technology demonstrations, infrastructure development, and R&D. So for example, the IRA provides a tax credit of up to $3 a kilogram for clean hydrogen. That helps bring green hydrogen, hydrogen produced from electricity, to within reach of other clean hydrogen technology production options, for example, using natural gas with SMR. But to further drive down the cost of clean hydrogen, the Department of Energy launched an Earthshot with the goal of reducing the cost of hydrogen to less than $1 a kilogram. Okay, so right now it costs about $7 or so if you want to produce green hydrogen. The goal is $1 per kilogram. Now that's ambitious. Don't know if we'll get there, but if they do, that will be a game changer. So all in all, the bill invests about $10 billion to launch the hydrogen economy. But in addition to shifting zero emission sources of energy, managing carbon emissions by capturing and storing them is also going to be needed. Most net zero studies including the U.S. long-term strategy, which is guiding policy at the highest level for getting to net zero emissions by 2050, indicate that from 10 to 20% of emissions reductions will come from carbon capture and storage. And the IRA and bill both provide support for the scale-up of CCS. Through the 45Q tax credit, you can now get up to $85 a ton for capturing and storing CO2. So this will make it economical to capture and store CO2 from many industrial sources, including hydrogen production, industrial heat, cement, steel, as well as others. And to help this along as well, the bill provides $2.1 billion worth of loans to build a pipeline infrastructure that will needed to transport CO2 from where it is captured to underground storage sites. Okay, one more. We've gone through a lot, right? But that doesn't end here. Carbon removal. This is the latest hot topic. And about 10 years ago, we got a much clearer idea of what it was going to take to stabilize the climate. I mean, in a word, we realized we had to get to net zero emissions. And that realization, I think, really turned the corner on how we think about this. But integrated assessment models, these again are these big techno-economic models that help us forecast the future in the energy transition. They said that reducing emissions alone was not going to be enough, and that we're going to actually have to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, particularly if we want to stabilize the climate with only 1.5 degrees C of warming. So it's about 1.1 today, so 1.5. So the IPCC special report on carbon dioxide on 1.5 degrees C warming really made the case that we needed this. And up until that time period, there was really very little research going on how we could actually take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So what we see today is a new development called carbon dioxide removal, which is a blanket term for both nature-based solutions, so forest, ag land, and so forth, wetlands, as well as engineered carbon removal. And both of these are supported by IRA and bill. Up to $180 per ton of CO2 removed from the atmosphere by direct air capture is available through IRA. And the bill provides $3.5 billion to actually start carbon removal hubs. So we're going to build facilities where we can do this, and we can test a variety of technologies and begin to build the infrastructure to do that. And to help reduce the cost of carbon dioxide removal, the Department of Energy has launched another Earthshot with the goal of reducing the cost of carbon dioxide storage or removal to $100 a ton. Right now it's about $500. So again, another very ambitious target. But again, if that can happen, that's a game changer. So wrapping up, I could go on, but I've gone on and on long enough. About the highlights of this historic legislation that has launched this decade of climate action. And I really am so excited, and I'm so optimistic that we've come to this turning point, and I hope you are too. And if I were sitting in your chairs, and I were thinking about my life now, and how I wanted to spend my career, I couldn't think of anything more exciting and more rewarding than being part of this transformative decade of climate action. And these activities are going to set in motion a cascade of changes that will transform not only our energy system, but create good new jobs, clean up the air and water, create a more equitable society, and protect our home planet Earth. So thank you. I look forward to our conversation.
While these two are getting ready, is amusing to me. It actually taught in this classroom last fall, an energy policy class, and I remember going through the various levers one can use to implement good energy policy, including tax incentives, including direct industrial incentives, including all these other things. And literally, Sally just gave a master course sort of rundown of all the things that miraculously have happened. We have a couple of prepared questions we're going to start with, and if you are interested in asking, please do this right now. Enter it, and I thought everyone was taking my picture. It didn't work out that way. But no, please do this, and we'll field them. Danny will be quarterback on that, and he'll read the questions out on mic as they come in. But we have some prepared questions. But actually, as I was listening to you talk, Sally, I want to ask one and hand it over to Valerie. But in your career, which is it's a famous career, right? You've done a tremendous number of things, as Ed pointed out. It must be unbelievably gratifying to be in the White House behind the scenes when this enormous set of bills and things have come through. What does it feel like? I mean, just from a personal sort of like energy researcher perspective, what an amazing thing to sort of to be there.
Yeah, well, number one, it's exciting. It's overwhelming. And we're surrounded by, it's just extraordinary, the people who are there, the quality and depth of their knowledge, their work ethic, their teamwork. It's sort of like whatever it takes to get it done, we need to get it done. And you all know that we went through many hills and valleys and so forth on the path to this legislation. It wasn't, a single, smooth shot. And I will say that all the downs were really painful. But one thing, when something didn't go quite the way we hoped, nobody was just sitting around and just crying in our tears. We immediately came up with Plan B. As you know, this legislation gets us to 40% reduction. Well, we want to get to 50% by 2030. So we're going to have to be thinking about a lot more creative ways, and I hope all of you are thinking about creative ways to make that last 10% emission reduction. Just maybe on a little bit more personal note, I think that we're all trying to figure out how we can contribute to helping to solve these problems. And sometimes it feels overwhelming because it's so big, there's so many people. And so I just encourage, all of you to, figure out, look at the context around you and figure out what's that special thing that you can bring to this. And I will say in the, in this ecosystem that we're in, our little team here, we are a few of, very few scientists and engineers, in this mix, because there are many people who are needed to contribute to these issues. And so our role has primarily become to help think about what is that next period, what is that 2030 to 2050, and make sure that we have all of the innovative technologies that we need to get all the way to net zero. So that's what's been occupying a lot of our time, and I think that it's very much appreciated by the folks who are working on the next hour, next day, next week, next month. Which there's a lot of that mentality because there needs to be. People are very appreciative and supportive of the fact that there are people who are also charting out the longer course, which I think is something that universities are so great at doing as well.
Terrific, yeah, and so I think you made a good case that, when we come here, and we're now in Pittsburgh for the Global Clean Energy Action Forum, we really are ready to act and move forward. And so with the recent legislation, and I thought for the first time when you said Ira and Bill, I thought of them as two benevolent individuals. And I hadn't thought about it that way before, but if you think about sort of what they are making possible, or the bills are making possible, how does that sort of reach out and connect with some of the gaps in our innovation ecosystem today? So if we think about the early and late stage barriers to innovation, where are these bills or other actions the administration is taking, sort of closing some of those gaps?
Right. Well, thinking about, what, I think that the number one thing, like I already said, is how do we get our electricity system to zero emission? Because once we do that, then that opens the door to doing a lot of other things. So if we look at where we are, we have a lot of great low, zero carbon generating technology. We can make electricity from the sun and the wind and so forth. But where I see the innovation frontier is how that system integrates together, right? So, how much solar, how much wind, how much clean firm power, and what kind of intelligence do we need within the grid? Because today, the grid actually operates quite simply. You put power in the grid and it basically flows from central generating stations down to, to individual homes and businesses and so forth. The question is do we need a lot more knowledge that will help inform a coordination between when and how we use electricity and when it's available, for example, when the sun is shining. So I think that is a very big gap that needs to be filled. And so I think that the Department of Energy's programs in grid planning, in advanced controls for transmission systems and so forth are going to be critically important. So I think that's one big gap. And there are programs that are being put in place. Now, to be frank, I think they could be more extensive than they are because we've realized it's complicated. So a second area that I think is really important is in electrification. And again, it doesn't sound so hard. You buy an EV and you maybe upgrade, the panel at your house and you plug it in. Not such a big deal. You had a gas furnace and you put in a heat pump. Yeah, so if one home does it, it's not a big deal. But when whole neighborhoods do this and when whole towns do this, what is going to be the impact on the distribution grid? So there's a lot of focus on the transmission grid, right? I mean, that's been the jobs of utilities and system operators and so forth. But the distribution system is sort of the less, the child that's gotten a little bit less attention. And again, we have the opportunity to reimagine what the distribution system looks like in terms of, again, building in the intelligence and control so that we can manage all of these very energy-intensive devices in such a way that they coordinate when they're actually operating. So not everybody charges their car at the same time, that they've got the oven on and that they've got the dishwasher on and so forth. So we need to think about the distribution system in a slightly different way. But at the same time, we need to make it convenient for people because at the end of the day, that's going to be important. So I'll just say one more area where innovation I think is important. So I talked about clean firm power, that we want to be able to have clean firm power. So right now, what are our options? Hydro can be, though of course that's limited geographically. We have nuclear power. Though nuclear power is, at least in this country, typically operated like a base load. We don't ramp it up and down, and we'd really like something that we could ramp up and down. And then there's also natural gas with carbon capture and storage. That could be operated more flexibly. But we've gotten really interested in a new technology, fusion energy. And so, this is, fusion energy is basically, instead of ripping apart atoms, that you actually fuse atoms together, things like helium and tritium in particular. And when you fuse them together, they release a massive amount of energy. And it's always been the joke that, this is going to take 40 years before this is developed, and it's always going to be 40 years. But there's actually been remarkable progress, both at research institutions as well as in the private sector. And it looks like that within a decade or so, it might be possible to have a pilot fusion plant. And if we can do that, that's a game changer, right? It's basically a nearly unlimited supply of clean energy. And it not only could be used for electricity production, but it can be used for combined heat and power. You can use it to produce hydrogen, at scale. You can use it to desalinate water. So we've gotten interested in that and are very encouraged by what we see. So those are just some examples of gaps that I'm interested in.
Great. For the sake of time, I'm wondering, I'm sure we've got some fantastic questions. Let's have it.
So lots of questions. This is great. One of the most popular questions right now is how can we make sure that these long-term policies would be protected from administration changes?
Good question.
I had that one too.
Well, I won't go there. But what I will say is that sitting in the office where we sit, we really have the privilege to talk to people all over the country. Unlike a lot of other government offices, which are restrictive in some ways at talking to companies and so forth, we're encouraged to go out in the world and interact with people. So we have a lot of companies, coming through, or state governments coming through, and what I've been really excited about is that when you look at this whole portfolio of technologies, which includes renewable energy and decarbonized fossil fuels and nuclear, there's sort of something in it for everybody. And in particular, hydrogen, for some reason, has just captured people's imagination. And this is all over the country. This is not in San Francisco or Berkeley or Washington, D.C. We hear from people all over the country. So my short answer is that we have to get people excited about the future. So fusion is another area where people get really excited about the future. We see people getting really excited about like a new generation of called nuclear batteries, where you could have a source of power that you could couple to modular manufacturing that would make it so that small communities could actually have the kind of power systems and advanced technologies to support their own economic development. So I think that for me, the way we solve that problem is we need to align multiple objectives, right? We need to align our climate objectives, our environmental objectives, our economic objectives, our justice objectives, and our national security objectives. And if we can do that, I think we will have the alignment we need to sustain this.
So I asked a question, and it says too many characters. At the moment, we have only 3 approved Class 6 CO2 injection wells in the U.S., and it looks like getting new wells approved takes 5 to 7 years, assuming there isn't any litigation. What's being done to safely accelerate this process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a huge effort to work with the EPA, with the state regulatory agencies, with the Department of Interior, with the Department of Agriculture, who oversees forest lands. There's actually I'm going to forget the name of this, Regulatory Coordinating Council. So all of these groups are being drawn together to basically block and tackle all of these barriers that make it take 5 to 7 years. And just a shout out for a fantastic Sarah Forbes, who is the White House Carbon Capture and Storage Coordinator, who's really doing a marvelous job of digging into all of these issues. So yes, it's a huge issue. The queue for Class 6 permits is not insignificant and growing. And so, so there is an effort to identify the problems, solve them, and move on. Yeah.
So, great. So I think coming back to the hot button political question for just a moment, but maybe thinking about a different twist on it. You've talked about sort of the importance of a consensus-based environment and making these decisions and building that in the halls of government as well as perhaps in academia as well. What lessons or insights do you have for us? What could we take away from your experience?
Well, I always believe that it's better to think about what we can do. You know, there's a lot of tendency to say, well, I don't like this, I don't like this, I don't like this, stop doing, you know. And I think that sort of helped create somewhat of an impasse. So I think we need to focus all of our attention on what we can do, the changes that we can make. I also believe that the broader the tent that we can make, you know, the bigger, the more inclusive we can be in every sense of that inclusive word, the more we'll be able to create the alignment. And so what does that boil down to? I think one is, you know, having an open mind. Two, I think being respectful of people and meeting them where they are and understanding what's important to people. And, you know, whether, regardless of what issue it is, that we're not going to be able to make progress unless we can try to, I think, sort of lower the temperature on the conflict and have us join together in a massive movement to all be starting to move in the right direction. And I will say that, you know, the economic opportunities created by this new way of thinking and fueled by Bill and Ira are also very catalytic in bringing the country together. So I think that's what I've learned. Actually, I must admit, I've thought that for a long time. Being in the environment that I'm in absolutely convinced me that that's true.
Well, that's exciting.
So another question, this is the second most popular question, is what, in your view, are the most impactful areas for those of us who are basic science researchers to be focusing on to impact the climate crisis?
Okay, great question. Well, I'll give you a specific example, and then I'll give you sort of a broader example answer to that. So, electrofuels are, you know, a technology where you would take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, you would take a carbon-free source of electricity and water, and you can split water, and then you can take that water and you can take the carbon dioxide, and you can synthesize a whole bunch of different kinds of organic chemicals, including making fuels. Okay, so why is that interesting, right? We can make biofuels. You know, there's a lot of work on advanced biofuels, making sustainable aviation fuels, and I think those are really important. But at some point, we also need to think about all the land that we're using for renewable energy, for feeding our people, and all these other services we want from the land. And it turns out that if you look at the footprint of the amount of land you need to make an electrofuel compared to a biofuel, for example, it's much, much more efficient. For the simple reason is that energy conversion, that first step of getting solar photons to electricity, is about 20% efficient in a solar panel, and photosynthetic efficiency is less than 1%, okay? So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and you know, no negative views towards biotechnology. I think this is it adds to that set of tools that we have. So that's sort of one area. So the basic science is electrocatalysis. And those of you involved in that field know it's a really exciting time because we have better models, we have better tools, we're using machine learning, you know, AI to discover new materials. You know, it's a fantastic time in that field. I also think that, you know, as we shift from a society that basically used combustion as our sort of, you know, one of our major most of our chemical reactions, especially related to energy, required combustion. You know, maybe we can start imagining a new society where combustion is not the foundation and really it's more, you know, electrocatalysis as a way of synthesizing lots of products. So thinking about that shift. So I think that's really important. Now, a lot of electrocatalysis is done today with rare materials that are either expensive or they're difficult to source because they only come from a few places. I think if we could get way better at finding alternatives of earth-abundant materials that are broadly distributed, that's another very, very fantastic area. You know, and it's not just making fuels. Like everything we look at really in this room, like there's some things that aren't made from fossil fuels, but a lot, you know, all the plastics, all the fabrics, you know, all our clothes, you know, unless we're wearing wool, which I'm not. You know, it's all made from petrochemicals. So, you know, if we are not producing petrochemicals for fuels, you know, what are we going to do for all these other products that we make from oil? So I think that's a really big opportunity. And then just to sort of wrap this up, I mean, I think broadly that the physical sciences, there have been so many advances in the fundamental physical sciences over the last decade, you know, really comparable to, you know, the advances that have been made in genomics and you know, in the biosciences. And the biosciences, I think, have now been really successful at taking all those fundamental discoveries that were invested in for 30 years, and they're starting to turn them into real products. You know, there are new medicines. Yeah, I mean, it's just incredible. The vaccine, you know, came out of that. I think for the physical sciences, it would be wonderful if we could turn that corner and start having many spin-offs and benefits of all that we've learned from, you know, from a fundamental molecular level to start thinking about reimagining industry, reimagining how we source everything that humans use and so forth. So I think there's huge opportunity in the fundamental sciences, yeah.
Perfect, and I think we'll entertain one more question to stay on Central. So last one, Dan, make it a good one.
Yeah, sure. So I'll read two questions because one of them is a joke, but I think it's worth sharing. Is there a provision in the IRA to produce more Costa Samarises? And if not, what will it take to achieve that goal? Because we love Costa. And then the actual last question, how is the administration incentivizing new industries to take the place of fossil fuel industries that may be the sole employer in rural areas?
Okay. I like the first question a lot. I mean, I think, you know, universities do a lot of innovative things, you know, cloning, you know, that can be a grand challenge. Or maybe that would be like a good PhD project for somebody is to clone Costa. I think you should clone Rachel too. So anyway, so what are we doing to focus on communities that are being left behind as the fossil industry goes away? There is a whole program designed to do that. There is a very extensive activity to identify at-risk communities. They're called energy communities. There are, Kate Gordon is leading a lot of those activities, literally going into communities, looking at what the options are, thinking about all these new industries. So I didn't talk a lot about supply chains, but if you think about, you know, battery electric vehicles, you know, where do we get our lithium? Where do we get cobalt, manganese, and so forth? So there's a very big effort to try to make those supply chains secure by, you know, building those industries in America. Same thing with building batteries. We want to be able to have battery factories. If we think about EVs, there's a lot of opportunity there. And if you look at a lot of the bill and IRA provisions, there is a very huge component of made in America. So those are some specific examples. The example I gave to you about the nuclear battery combined with advanced manufacturing, there are communities in Wyoming, for example, that have already stood up and said, you know, we used to do coal mining, now we're really excited to do advanced manufacturing that with these new kind of technologies. So, perfect. Yeah.
Well, that concludes our question and answer section. Thank you so much. What a delightful thing to have you here, and it's just great also to have Costa in the room as well, even though he's not officially at CMU right now. We're looking forward to your return. And I also just deeply want to thank the Scott Institute staff, Daniel, Kristen, Caitlin, and Sarah, and of course Ginny, all put in some time on this, and we're here to do more of these. So if you're faculty, you have big ideas on things that we can do, let us know. It's our job to promote, create, and connect. And so this is an example of what can happen. So thank you all, and we'll see you hopefully downtown sometime over the next couple of days. Participate. Thanks.